Welcome to the Building with Metal podcast, presented by McElroy Metal. Whether you're a contractor, architect, designer, or building owner, we're here to help you build better with metal roofing and siding products.
Hello, I'm your host, Kathi Miller, and today we're thrilled to have Nick Fedele with Metal Alliance on the show. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, Kathi, how are you? Nice to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you as well. So this is actually your second visit to the show. So in case some of our listeners missed your first interview with Todd, can you kind of remind us a little bit about where you're located, what you guys focus on, the markets you serve, etc.?
Sure. So we are primarily an architectural sheet metal fabricator and contractor. We kind of serve the Philadelphia and New Jersey market, Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey market for the most part. We're located just north of the city of Philadelphia. And we do all types of exterior envelope work, primarily standing seam, roofing, and a lot of wall panel work, ACM panels, rain screens, all that type of stuff. Really, the only thing on the exterior envelope that we don't touch is flat roofing products, and then, concrete work, block walls, and that type of stuff.
Excellent. So as I like to say, you guys do all the fancy, pretty stuff, right?
Yeah. That's kind of what we're known for. We do a lot of historical restoration, and we tend to kind of pick up the stuff that, most other guys kind of look at and go, ugh, that's probably a little bit outside of our, comfort zone, or it's a little messy, or, don't want to touch that. That's the stuff that we kind of get excited about.
Exactly. So historical renovations, I hadn't planned to talk about that today, but that's interesting. Let's talk about that for a minute. What kind of different challenges and risks and skill sets do you need for historic renovations? Yeah,
they tend to be a lot of copper work. And, with that kind of comes a lot of soldering and kind of matching your historical, details and kind of, qualities, and putting things back exactly the way that they were. One, kind of funny story that I like to tell was we were doing renovate an entire copper re-roof on a historical building in the city of Philadelphia. And we tore the roof off, and there was the ridge beam had kind of a sag, in it. Mm-hmm. And we had to take the ridge beam out, and we wanted to, our plan was to go back with a steel, ridge beam. The problem was steel can't sag, and we had to make the roof sag again. So we ended up having to go back with a steel ridge beam and kind of set it a little bit lower and build it up with wood blocking to kind of get that tapered sag back in, because that's the way the building was. So you get kind of, funky stuff like that you see, we kind of see all the time, and we've just kind of become used to it. But, those are some of the things that with a historical restoration, while you kind of understand it, it sometimes just makes you scratch your head and go, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, every project without a doubt is different in that case, right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you guys get your start in business? Remind our listeners of that in case they missed the first episode.
Yeah, so we've been around. The company was started in 1993. I was not the founder back in 1993. That was, Rich Cacelli. Richie, he was the former owner. He had a partner. They were, sheet metal workers by trade. And they, started the business and kind of, grew it from 1993 until 2021. And I bought the business from Richie in 2021, and he still, is pretty active with us. And, we work together by choice at this point. So, we've been around, like I said, I guess it's 32 years now, and started really with a lot of that historical restoration work, in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a very big, Absolutely. Historic city, and tons of copper work, and, tons of monuments and historical landmarks and all that type of stuff. So it was a great place, kind of for them to start. And it started with that stuff and then kind of, took off from there.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can only imagine. I haven't been to the city before to tour it and look at a lot of those sites, but it's definitely on the list. So
yeah, it's definitely, a cool place. If you get the opportunity, let me know if you wind up here, and we'll take you and show you some, a lot of the stuff that we've done. Our fingerprints are kind of all over. Yeah, they're kind of all over a lot of the landmarks down there.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to make that happen. So today specifically, we wanted to kind of dive in and kind of just do a project discussion on something cool that you guys have done lately and talk about, why metal was chosen, how the job went, how you approached it, and why. And so I think you had said you maybe wanted to talk about the Bucks County Community College today. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So fill me in. Let's start with kind of what's the use of the building?
So it is it's an educational building, at a community college, lots of classrooms and, and that type of stuff. And it had an old, kind of slate tile roof on it, terracotta, that was leaking, pretty badly. And they had kind of, come to us and asked, they had some thoughts in mind. They wanted to do, either a standing seam aluminum roof or a standing seam zinc roof. Steel was not in kind of their thought process, primarily because of, I think some of the prevailing belief that's out there that steel doesn't have the same warranties as aluminum. It rusts and it corrodes and all that type of stuff. So that's kind of how the conversation started. With them was, hey, can you guys do a zinc roof or, kind of an aluminum standing seam? And we had said, yeah, sure, we can. But why don't you think about, a steel standing seam roof? They're comparatively, just as good as aluminum, if not better. It's better for your use case than zinc. And it's more cost effective. And we had kind of, partnered with you guys, and pitched them on the 238T, 24 gauge steel, with the, all the warranty you get, the weather, long warranty, all of that type of stuff. And ultimately, we were able to show them that a steel 238T was without question, the best, option, for their kind of use case.
So it's great that you were able to be a consultant to them, right? In that case, and a few things come to mind, right? So, you mentioned, and you're not wrong that a lot of people believe aluminum is a superior product. But interestingly, when you're talking with them, what kind of warranties? Let's talk substrate warranties. What do you offer, like on a stainless and aluminum versus like a Galvalume steel?
The warranties are pretty, comparable. I think there's this thought that we see very often, and I think it's kind of baked into, the psyche up here in the Northeast, is that everybody needs to do aluminum because of the salt air. And if you look at the warranties on, the Galvalume products, and, I can speak to, your guys' stuff in particular, the call out is within like 300 yards of breaking surf, which is very, 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 very minimal when you look at, the applications that we're talking about. And we hear people say, oh, I need an aluminum roof because, of the salt air. And there's people who are like 35 miles from, breaking surf. And it's like, then it becomes an education process where we say to them, got it. I understand that's, that's what most people believe, but here's actually the facts. And most people are when you get the opportunity to have that conversation, most people are actually fairly receptive to that. I think it's a misconception that's pretty, widely out there, right, that, you can't do steel because those old rusted roofs that you see all over the place that are all metal, like that's steel, and that's what happens with steel. And it's, there's an education process that has to go on to kind of let people know that that's not the same thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. Back in the day, that was straight galvanized, right? And the Galvalume technology is a combination of zinc, but also the aluminum. So you get the strength of one property and the sacrificial barrier of another. And that's really why, as manufacturers, we're able to offer 50 and 60-year warranties, on the substrate. So right. It really has come a long way as a product that has a lot to tell. So one of the other things we find too, Nick, is that people, even in direct hurricane application areas, are still going ahead and moving away from aluminum and to a Galvalume steel just because of the difference in uplift, right?
Right.
the steel is going to perform so much better in high winds that, aluminum maybe would last longer with corrosion, but it's not going to stay on the roof as long, right? Because of the uplift.
Exactly.
And so
right.
It's a double-edged sword there. So I'm interested,
sure.
why did they weren't interested in going back to slate? So let's kind of hop back to the beginning. How old was the slate roof? It's unusual, for them to have a short lifespan, right?
Yeah, I don't know the exact age, but it's old. I mean, the college has been around a long time. I believe it's the original roof.
Okay.
Slate anymore, I think it's a very difficult product to get a lot of people to work with. Like there's just not, it's very expensive, one, and there's not a whole ton of people who are going back, and I'll say, doing slate with the level of craftsmanship that was done, 70, right. 80, years ago. So we do see fairly often there's a push to go away from slate, away from tile, and go to something that, still is aesthetically pleasing. I think a lot of people don't want to tear off slate and go to shingle, just asphalt shingle. You're taking a really nice architectural quality away from the building and replacing it with like slop. Whereas going to a standing seam or a metal roof, you are taking one architecturally, appealing thing and replacing it with, at least in my opinion, something that is, also architecturally appealing, which is also a lot more functional and a lot more practical.
Absolutely. And a lot lighter weight, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Slate's a really heavy product. And so you have to have a lot of infrastructure, right? As far as roof support and that to support it. And I think you're right. We've seen the same thing as steel products have increased their longevity, right? There is a move to those kinds of products because we can offer out, there's 20 different styles of standing seam, right? I mean, you can even get some that look like slate, right? You can get one that looks like a shingle, et cetera. So lots of products out there. Okay. So you kind of helped them decide to go to a Galvalume product. How long are these panel runs, Nick? Are they short, long?
These were what I would consider to kind of be mid-range. I want to say they were somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 feet. I can't recall, off the top of my head exactly, but for us, 20 foot is like short, and we consider long, multi-hundred feet, 100 feet plus, for us is kind of long. So they were in that kind of, mid-range, length. Yeah.
Yeah, so 50 to 60, is mid-range for you. But the other thing I think that I'm sure you're aware of is, the coefficient of expansion, right, for aluminum.
Yep.
Even on a 50 to 60 foot panel, which is moderate, you're going to have a fair amount of expansion and contraction.
For sure.
So obviously, a little bit about that. Talk to our listeners a little bit, if you would, Nick, about how that affects, if you were going with aluminum, what challenges that presents, and how you have to account for that expansion.
Yeah. So I'll kind of talk to this one in particular. This roof was it's a single slope, and there were dormers on the roof, kind of scattered throughout. And we went back with a panel that when you came down the roof and got to the dormer, we bent the panels so you had one continuous panel from the ridge all the way down across the dormer. We didn't have to put any flashing along the dormers, and that just would have become something that was untenable to do, with an aluminum panel because of the expansion. So there's a lot of kind of nuances to this roof in particular, where there were custom built stainless steel saddles that we had to put next to the dormers to funnel water away from kind of that rising wall and where you have some trim detail in there. So there was a lot of these kind of. It wasn't just a straight run where, you didn't have to really worry about expansion and all that type of stuff. There's all these little quirks and details that if you really have to take expansion, into consideration, it just kind of breaks the whole thought process.
Exactly. Yeah. So you mentioned you guys chose the 238T. Talk to us a little bit about why you chose that panel, maybe other things you considered.
Yeah, we are a big T panel fan. Between the 138 and the 238, there's so many positive qualities to the T panel that if given a choice, that's kind of where we tend to gravitate to. It's one that we like installing. You can start at any point and move left, move right. You can, skip to, come back later, flash in units and pick up, on one side and keep running. You can cut a batten cap off and take a panel out, do repair work or whatever, put a new panel in and re-batten cap it. Like there's just so many good qualities, to kind of these T-seam systems that was really, that was the front runner without question.
Yeah. Hands down, it's amazing when installers get their first exposure to a non-handed panel, or what we call a symmetrical versus, left to right or an asymmetrical. And it is just night and day. You can put your best guy, on a dormer, have your other guys take and go run straight runs and catch back up. And so, and again, like you said, even the repair or replaceability, right? There's times a trade comes in after you, right? And messes up a panel, and you haven't even turned it over to an owner yet, and you can fix that. So
exactly.
It is a really cool system. Now, do your projects typically, Nick, have weather-tight warranties, or is that not an element that you end up facing a lot?
No, we do weather-tight warranties, fairly often. This project in particular did not have a weather-tight warranty. However, we did wind up towards the end. We actually had an inspector come in and do the inspection as if we would have had a weather-tight warranty. That's something that we do every now and then, for a customer, just to show, quality and all that type of stuff, even if the weather-tight warranty was not something that they were interested in.
Well, that's a nice, added benefit that you give people.
Yeah. It doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally we will do it.
All right. So let's talk any challenges on the project other than what you already talked about, the dormers we touched on a little bit. Anything else that was noteworthy?
Yeah. So this was a concrete deck. And it was like a terracotta system. So we had torn off down to the concrete deck, and we went back with a nail board, with insulation and an ice and water shield. And then on those dormers, they were originally kind of pitched back towards the building, which was we kind of believe was creating a lot of the water penetration issues and all that type of stuff. So on the dormers, we actually added additional tapered insulation to kind of change the pitch of those dormers away from the building, to kind of just help with, water flowing in the direction that you would want the water to flow.
Exactly. You got to nudge in the other direction.
Exactly. So there were all these, there was nothing crazy, super crazy, but there was just all of these kind of details that, when you've been doing this as an organization, and we have guys who've been here since day one, there's these all these random little things that, they pick up on, that they go, hey, I've seen this before. This is going to be a problem. Hey, we need to address this. And that just comes from kind of, the institutional knowledge that you have and have kind of built over, multiple decades, that I think, a lot of contractors, if this isn't what you do, if you kind of do a whole bunch of different stuff, those are things that you just kind of don't pick up on.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that tribal knowledge, right? That feet on the roof, so to speak, is just hard to beat. So let's talk a little bit about, employee retention, attraction, training. How do you guys handle all of that? So
we are very fortunate that we have I think I said this in my podcast with Todd, that I will brag on our guys all day long, and I'll put them up against anybody in the business. I think we have the best crew out there. We have one funny story that I do tell is when we were going through kind of the sale process, Richie and I had gotten a list of, employee names redacted, but how with employee tenures and years that they started and all that type of stuff. And I remember saying, hey, can I have like an updated list? Because there's employees that say they've been here since like 1995. And it's 2021 or whatever it was. And it was like, no, this is the updated list. And I was like, oh, wow, like that's just not something that you see, no. Very often. So I was under the original assumption that this list was like 10 years old. And it very much was current. And almost all of those guys are, still around. So we have had, we've had really good, retention. We've got a lot of really skilled guys. We've got a lot of apprentices coming up who we've been really, really happy with. So we're kind of, we refer to it as kind of like our youth movement, where we are, very heavily investing in that next generation, that's going to kind of come up and learn from, the guys who've been around for a really long time, have, the best skill set out there, in my opinion. And it's, so far it's been working really well.
Well, kudos to you on several fronts, right? I mean, to retain employees that long is huge in itself, right?
Yep.
But also that, pat yourselves on the back that you guys have recognized the need for the youth movement, and, the trades in general haven't done a great job lately, right? Attracting people, right? And so for you guys to take a leading edge on that and then get them to kind of have, the older guys bring them along beyond, the apprenticeship is just absolutely fabulous. And I'm sure will bode really well for you guys going forward.
Yeah, it is without question. It is a team effort. You can't, that's not something you can do without, really solid, a really solid team all the way around, in all aspects. It's not something that, one person can kind of, dictate or force. Like it's a culture thing. And, that's a testament to, everybody, Richie, who originally owned the company, and the guys who he's had forever. It's just that culture was something that, was already here. It's been here a long time. I'm just the most current steward of it, but it's, it's a well-rooted and kind of long-term thing.
That's a fabulous way to look at yourself as the steward. So not the boss, just the steward of continuing, right? Well, especially I think considering that you do so much historical building work. I mean, you're, the exposure, right, and the risk if your guys were to do something wrong is greater than, not to say someone's home is not important, right, but you're just working at an elevated level there. So you mentioned earlier, Nick, that in this particular project at Bucks Community College that, you were dealing with a concrete deck and you did your tear off. So talk to us a little bit, and I realize it may be different for different projects, but how do you decide your approach? Is there structural engineers involved, architects? You just sometimes do design build stuff where owners just come to you?
Yeah, it is, take your pick. Every job is, is very much, a different thing. We do work with engineers, we do work with architects, we do, design build, we do design assist. We oftentimes, will lean on Charlie and a lot of the McElroy team for, hey, here's this issue that we have, and we have a very, collaborative relationship where we kick around ideas and say, hey, and even try and raise issues that we think maybe might be an issue, but let's just talk about them so that they're kind of out there and, we've kind of addressed them. So our preference is to be involved as early as humanly possible. If we can get involved with an architect or an engineer, early in the project, or with a general contractor on a design build, or an owner, if it's something, it's not a kind of a ground up thing and it's more just a roof replacement. Those things make projects go a lot better. You can kind of, we have the benefit of being the installer and having seen a ton of this stuff. So we know what goes together well and what on paper kind of sounds great and looks great in a drawing. But when you actually get to trying to make that happen in real life, like it just doesn't, it doesn't work that way. So to the extent that we can work, collaboratively with architects, engineers, roof consultants, designers, whoever, those projects tend to have the best outcomes for sure.
Absolutely. I think it really goes to that concept of a team, right? And everybody brings a different frame of expertise. And when people can respect each other's knowledge and then trying to find that common solution, it usually ends up better off. And I know at McElroy, we're thrilled to be, part of your team and part of your solutions. And Charlie's a guy that we all lean on heavily for sure. So.
I could do a 60-minute podcast just singing Charlie's praises, but I can save that for another episode.
I was going to say, if we do that, it'll go to his head. But yeah, maybe we'll have to do that on another show. So, well, let's talk about the feedback to your project a little bit. How, anything from the owner? How did they feel? How about the community?
Yeah, I think they've been pretty happy with it. I think, it's one that I think looks great. I know, like I said, we had an inspector come out who's, familiar with all the weather type warranties, and the feedback from them was excellent. So, it's one we're certainly proud of. And it's it's a beautiful building, on the campus over there, kind of, right in the middle. So hopefully it's one that they look at, for a number of years and kind of, are happy with. And I think so far that's kind of been the case.
Absolutely. Well, any chance we could get some photos of that to link in the show notes?
That is on our plan. We have been, notoriously bad, and I'll wear the responsibility for that one, and kind of going out and taking pictures of stuff. But that is, we're doing another round of photography and videography, and that one is certainly on the list.
Absolutely. Well, that'd be great. Be sure and share it with us if you would, and we'll link it in the show notes whenever we get those. And certainly, if you ever need our help, Nick sourcing a local guy with a drone or whatever, we're happy to participate in that. If Kathi
I may take you up on that.
For sure.
Yeah,
We'd love to do it. For sure.
Sounds
all right.
good.
Well, anything else about the project we need to share with our listeners before we wrap up today?
I don't think so. I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining the show and sharing about the project there. And as always, we appreciate your partnership. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to the Building with Metal podcast, presented by McElroy Metal. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us online at www.mcelroymetal.com for more info and products. Until next time, keep building with metal.